On the 31st of January of 1839, William Henry Fox Talbot almost invented photography. He presented to the Royal Society his process for making photogenic drawings that, according to him, could produce images from nature in just a few seconds, the same kind of images that would take artists days or weeks to create. The Royal Society was impressed, but not too much, because Talbot's method for fixing his images had not been perfected yet, and that was the key to actually inventing photography. But despite not being a complete success, it was still the first ever public presentation of a photographic process. And so the hype was created, and when Daguerre presented his own process on the 19th of August of the same year, the world was hungry for it. Of course, the French government buying the patent and then giving it to the world also helped the daguerreotype become as popular as it did. At first, photography was received with excitement by everyone, including the artist that Talbot said his invention would replace. Just being able to freeze light and time on metal or paper was just so magical and unbelievable that everyone was too amazed to be threatened. Yet, in that period of excitement and optimism, new photographic processes were being invented at an amazing speed, and these new processes were able to create images with different characteristics and to correct the shortcomings of the older methods. The promise of what photography could become captivated the imagination of the creatives of its time, like Lewis Carroll, who in 1855 wrote a short story about ChatGPT. Like Lewis Carroll, who in 1855 wrote a short story about an extraordinary new photographic process, and it starts with this sentence. The recent extraordinary discovery in photography, as applied to the operations of the mind, has reduced the art of novel writing to the merest mechanical labor. And then the story goes on to describe this new amazing photographic process that is capable of capturing the hidden stories in the imagination of the person being photographed and then print them on photographic paper. But inevitably, artists started feeling like photography was trespassing into their territory. Painters especially were getting very defensive of their art. We have Delacroix completely dismissing photography, saying that an artist that relies on it is nothing but a machine hitched to another machine. Henri de Laborde manages to be a bit more diplomatic yet condescending and says that photography is a science, not an art, and as such only allows a photographer to show off his scientific abilities and his skill at manipulating chemicals. It has no room for creativity, for artistic sensibility, or for the manipulation of what's being represented. But my absolutely favorite text from the 19th century, just tearing down photography, comes from a writer, not a painter, Baudelaire. This text is part of his introduction to the Salon of 1859, and it contains gems such as: the photographic industry was the refuge of all field painters, either talentless or too lazy to complete their studies. This universal infatuation bore not only the character of blindness and imbecility, but also the color of revenge. And if photography is allowed to supplement art in some of its functions, it will soon have supplanted or corrupted it altogether, thanks to the natural alliance it will find in the stupidity of the crowds. But despite how he makes it sound, Baudelaire was not anti-photography. He was just of the opinion that while photography was not an art, a photographer could be an artist. And he makes that opinion apparent in a letter to his mother, where he says he would love to have a photograph of her, but it can't be any photograph. She would have to go with him to one of the good photographers that he knows in Paris that would be able to make a true portrait of her and not just a copy of her features. This idea that photography as a medium was not an art, but that in the hands of an artist could be elevated to such, had other supporters besides Baudelaire, and it became so popular that it's still how we think of it today. So with that kind of recognition and legitimacy, it were now the artist photographers that were trying to distance themselves from the casuals, the people just taking pictures of their daily life, their family, their travels. Especially after the invention of the Kodak camera in 1888, which just delivered exactly what the slogan promised: The users really only needed to press a button until they ran out of film and then send the camera back to the factory, and later they would get their pictures in the mail and a camera loaded with new film ready for more photos. That is why, in 1899, Alfred Stieglitz separates photographers into three categories. We have the ignorant, that only takes casual pictures and doesn't care for artistry or the technical matters of photography. Then we have the technician who has in-depth knowledge of how to operate the camera and knows how to process a photograph in the darkroom. And then we have the artist photographer who, in addition to the technical knowledge, also has the sensitivity and the inspiration of a true artist. Pictorialist photographers like Stieglitz kinda sound a bit too full of themselves, but they have some reason for it. They did like to push the boundaries of what the medium of photography could achieve, and they experimented a lot with alternative photographic methods like photomontage, gum bichromate prints, bromoil prints that could achieve images that looked like drawings or watercolor paintings or lithographs. And so a kind of chase started, with photography trying to look more like painting and painting trying its hardest to distance itself from photography. It forced the traditional arts to ask questions like, what can art be made of? What are the tools, mediums, and materials of art? What's art even? And the answers to those questions that we are still seeking gave us the explosion of creativity that was the 20th century. And that brings us finally to the elephant in the room and the reason why I made this video: AI art. As a motion designer, I've been paying attention to what's going on in the world of AI generated images, and I keep seeing it being compared with photography. And as a lover of history, that comparison bothers me a little bit. It's used either to say that artists should be afraid because this will shake our world like photography did in the 19th century, or to say that there's absolutely nothing to worry about, that just like photography didn't replace painting, AI images are not going to replace illustration or design. And while I think some comparisons with photography are valid, like both photography and AI art seem to have the ability of turning anyone into an art theorist and critic, both make us reflect on concepts such as creativity, authorship, and ownership of visual products. And both have forced and are forcing new legislation into existing to regulate a new tool. But I think that's where the comparison ends. Because if you start looking in depth into the history of photography and the impact it had on society, you start seeing that it was so much more than just a way to automate the production of images. It made the creation, consumption, and ownership of images something banal. Paraphrasing Lady Elizabeth Eastlake, photography could now be found anywhere, from the walls of a palace to the pocket of a condemned man. It flooded the world with images. It also shook our understanding of art, and it broke structures and rules that had gone unquestioned since ancient Greece. And that shaking of the art world hasn't stopped since then. Many things, not just AI, have caused some bigger ripples, but they're just kind of bigger ripples, they're not a new earthquake. AI was born into a world already saturated with images because it wouldn't be able to be born otherwise. It needs that gigantic data set to train its algorithms. It never even had the space to cause the same kind of impact as photography did. And after this initial hype dies down, will it have any lasting social impact? Or will it just become another tool of the digital artist? Photography has long lost its novelty factor, but we can't get enough of it. We just keep reinventing it. Materials have changed, cameras have changed, we have dematerialized photography, and there's just something about it that keeps capturing us after almost 200 years. And that's its relation to time. Each photo freezes a moment in time that will never be repeated. You can make endless copies of a photograph, but you cannot take the same photo twice, not even the most staged ones. And like that, each selfie, each photo of an aesthetic breakfast, of our pets or vacations, become a reminder of our mortality. And we, as humans, love that kind of creepy stuff.